How's it going? Steve here, and this video is going to be a quick overview of the Pulsar black and white panel, just to give you a quick run through of what each of the functions does. And then the second half of the video is going to be a quick demo showing how you can use some of those functions to turn this particular image into a pretty cool looking black and white. So without further ado, let's crack on. Now the first thing that you're going to see in the panel right at the top here, black and white conversion, we've got two methods, and each one comes with a drop down of a couple of basic presets. So we've got the channel mixer black and white conversions, and we've got gradient map conversions. If you just keep it on random and then hit apply mixer, it's going to cycle through and create random black and white conversions based on the channel mixer adjustment layer. So if you're not quite sure what exactly you want, then just hit this a few times until you see something that looks pretty good, and then just go with that. Otherwise, if there are some presets that you've used before that you know that you want to use next time, then you can just grab those from the drop down. And then we have the gradient maps. There's no random option on the gradient maps here. It doesn't really make sense to do that. But yeah, again, each one is a preset that you can apply that's going to give a slightly different effect. If you're just getting started, I like the linear contrast, which is just going to apply a straightforward black to white gradient across the image. Next, we have this add gradient section, and this is basically a shortcut, kind of a intuitive way to quickly add gradients, because the process that I particularly like to use to create the style of black and white image that appeals to me heavily involves the use of gradients. So I've made that very easy to use and quickly apply the kind of gradients that we want to use to get that effect. So the way it works, we've got this slider here. If you want to add a black gradient, then just put the slider all the way to the black end. Choose your angle on the dial here. So the direction of the arrow is the direction that is going to fade from whatever color you've selected here in the bar out to transparent. And then here we've got a choice of 3 blend modes that we can apply the gradient on. I'll just show you on the normal blend mode first so you can visualize what this is going to look like. So I'll hit linear gradient, and we'll see we've got a black to transparent linear gradient on that angle coming slightly from the top left down to the bottom right. Now if I undo that and switch it around the other way, we can see the black to transparent goes the other way. You can go from top to bottom, bottom to top, and so on. You get the idea. If we go to the other end, we can add a white gradient like so. Now, because this image is quite light, I'll stick with the black gradients just so you can see exactly what's happening. We've got 2 other types of gradient. We've got radial and reflected. Radial, the angle doesn't actually do anything because it's just going to add a radial gradient starting from the color that you've selected here in the middle and fade out towards the edges. And then a reflected gradient is, as you can see here, so let me just make that 90 degrees so we can see more clearly what that is. That's starting from the color in the middle and then fading out in both directions. So that's a particular type of gradient that I like to use. And again, obviously you can change the angle of those reflected gradients. But now that we've seen what that looks like just on the normal blend mode, whilst you will find yourself using it in that blend mode, you're probably going to want to use it in overlay most of the time. Soft light has got its uses as well, but each of these, overlay and soft light, are going to apply the gradient with a blend mode that's going to essentially turn it into either a darkening or a lightening gradient. So for example, if we want to add a darkening effect from top left to bottom right, we can do that. And then we can add multiples, obviously, add some coming from top right to bottom left. We can do one down here this way, and so on and so forth. Let's get rid of those. And then again, a white gradient is going to add a lightening effect, which again, like I said, is different to just applying a white gradient on top of your image. And I can demonstrate that now by changing the blend mode over here. This is what it looks like in overlay, and this is what it looks like in normal. Going back to overlay. So that is how the gradients work. The way that I like to use them mostly is in conjunction with selections so that we can apply gradients to portions of the image. So we'll come on to that in a minute when we get to the saved selections section and the demonstration that we're going to run through for this image. Next we have the treatments section. I wasn't quite sure what else to call this. If you've got a better name for it, let me know and maybe I'll update it for the next version. But essentially what this is going to give us is the option to set either the black point or the white point of the image, and it's going to do that with a curves adjustment. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. So if I leave this on black point of 0 and hit the button, we'll see here we've got set shadows 0. I'll open that up, and it's just moved the black point of the curve just up to the point where the black point of the image now is set to 0, which is pure black. So if we were to find the darkest pixel on this image, it would be black. And now if I was to select something else in here, say for example 20 or 21, and hit the button, that is now going to add an adjustment layer which sets the black point so that the darkest pixel in the image is now a lightness value of 21. Now that didn't actually make much difference because it's already quite light down there in the shadows, but you can just see a difference there if I'm toggling off and on a couple of times. Maybe we'll just do a slightly more extreme example, move that up to say 40, 50, say 50 roughly, hit the button there, and we're just raising the black point there so that the darkest pixel in the image is now 49, has a lightness value of 49. Now that is different to actually just moving this point here up to 49. So you'll notice if I hover over the black point here, it's actually set to 30. And the reason that doesn't actually say 49 there, which is what we set the black point to, is because it's adjusting the black point of the curve so that the black point of the actual image is that value that we selected. So in this case, 49. If you're not worried about the technicality of what's actually happening here, then what you can treat this as is just a way to either lift the shadows, or the opposite of that, we can bring the white point down and lower the white point. So that again is going to come into use a lot more when we start working with selections. Before we get there though, load selections, we have two options. So we've got luminosity ranges and a zone system. Luminosity ranges, if we click this button here, we just pop this little bar out where we can quickly and easily select a luminosity range. So if we want to select the midtones of the image, we can click the 0 button. If we want to select shadows, we can select one of the minus buttons there, -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. -5 is going to select the very darkest pixels in the image, whereas -1 is going to select basically the dark half of the image, and then the numbers in between are somewhere in between that, and vice versa. We can select the light half by selecting 1 there, and then the very brightest pixels by selecting 5. And if you're familiar with luminosity selections, then this will be very straightforward to you. If not, then stay tuned for the rest of the videos in this series where we're going to look at this a little bit more. So that's luminosity selections. Let's close that and go over to the zone system options. Now the way this differs from luminosity range is just at a very, very high level. The zone system is essentially dividing the histogram up into a set number of zones. So let me just bring up a quick brush here. It's probably easier if I can just draw it. So say we have the histogram like this. This is our histogram. With luminosity selections, if we're selecting the shadows, let's say shadows 1, we're selecting all of the data in the left half, the dark half of the histogram. If we select shadows 5, then we're selecting this kind of portion down here, only the darkest ones, whereas shadows 4 is kind of this plus a little bit more. However, the zone system, let's say we've got 10 zones, then the histogram is essentially divided into equal, hang on, how many is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's divided into zones there, where in this example, zone 2 would be selecting everything there. Zone 6 would be selecting everything there. So that's a pretty crude example of how this works, but it's probably outside of the scope of this video to go into that in too much depth. We will come on to that later in future videos, but for now, just know that it's there. And that brings us on to the saved selections. So this is really, really powerful, and it's a way that I've made dealing with selections and channels in the channels panel really easy, and it removes all of the complication with using selections and saving them and intersecting, adding, subtracting, and all the rest of it. So here's a quick run through of how that works. And I've picked this particular image to get started with because it's a nice square subject that we can just quickly draw a nice selection around. So I'm going to use the pen tool for this and then close it off there. I'll right click, make selection, and click OK. So we have a selection here as shown by the marching ants. Now, if I wanted to save this normally as a channel, I would go into the channels panel, save it, and then it would be over there, and I'd have to come over there to then load it as a selection again using various keyboard and mouse combinations. Here we can just click Save Active Selection, get this pop up. I can give it a name, and I do recommend giving your selections a name for reasons that will become apparent in a minute. So we'll call this Building. We'll click OK. Now we have here Saved Selections, Building, and then we've got a couple of buttons here that we can use to do various things with, which I'll show you in just a minute. But if I now deselect my selection there, if I want to load that building selection, I can just press the button there and it loads it. So with that, what else can we do? Well, if I now want to use this building to create a selection of everything else, so say the sky in this case, because that's all there is, that's not the building, let me Control or Command A to select the entire canvas. And so if we think about this, what is the sky? It's the entire image minus the building. So we've selected the entire image. If I want to now subtract the building from this selection, I can click the Subtract button here. And now that's subtracted the building from the selection, and I can save this as sky. So Save Active Selection, Sky. And now I can easily toggle between selecting building and sky, building and sky, and do whatever I would want to do with those selections. Before we move on to actually using these, let me just show you how I would then go ahead and divide this building up into further selections. So part of the process for the particular black and white look and feel that I like creating, it involves dividing buildings like this up into their sort of individual faces and creating a selection for each face and then treating those faces separately and individually. What do we have? We've got this top bit, we've got this kind of front side. If we take this diagonal as like a main divider, we've got this front side and then we've got this left side here. So if we want to create a selection just for let's start off with this front section here. So I'm going to take my pen tool and I'm just going to go over the edges a little bit into the background like that, and then I'm going to come up here, trace that line, and then join the selection up, or join the path up, right click, make selection, OK. Now you can see here that I've gone over the edge into the background. And the reason I've done that is because if I was to try to create this selection and then draw a line down here that matches the exact selection that I created for the building selection, then there's a very high chance that I'm not going to get that absolutely precisely matching. So now that I have this selection that goes over the edges slightly into the sky, what I can do is now intersect this with the selection I've already created for the building. And by doing that, we're going to end up with a selection that contains everything that is in this selection, only where it overlaps with the building. So this intersection, this intersect button here, if I hit that on the building, then it's going to tuck in and give me a selection of just that front face. So let's save that as front. Deselect, so now we have building, sky, and front. So now if I want to create selections for the top section and the left section, then what can I do? Well, let's load the building, and now let's subtract the front panel, the front face of the building, with the minus button here. So now we have something that's the top and the left. So let's save that as top and left. So now we have the top and left. What I can do again is just, well, this time I'm going to select the lasso tool, and I'm going to just draw roughly around the entire top bit there, knowing that I can now intersect it with this top and left so that it hones in just on that top bit there and excludes the left panel. So let's intersect that. Now we have the top panel, so I can save that, top, and I can do the same thing here with the left. Just draw a selection that encapsulates everything that I want it to include, knowing that we've got this one here to intersect it with. We'll save that as left. So now I can get rid of top and left by hitting the delete button. And there we go, we've got building, sky, front, top, and left. And for the sake of this demo, that's probably as much as we need to do. Now that we have all of our saved selections and they're easily accessible and usable, we can start using them to make some targeted adjustments. So what I think I'll do here just to get started is make an adjustment that darkens the sky. So I found a good, like if you want to go for this particular effect, a good way of darkening the sky nicely that works for this particular style is by reducing the white point down to something like 10 or 20. Let's split the difference and go 15. Now, where do we want this applied? Let's apply it to the sky. So I'll click sky. We'll load that as a selection. Now I'll hit the set white point button. And that's gone very, very dark actually. I think because there's not really any detail in the sky, I think we probably didn't need to go quite that dark. So what you can do at this point now is just double click and open to adjust the curve as you see fit. As normal, it is just a curves adjustment at the end of the day. So there's that. Now we can start applying some gradients to the faces of the building. What I like to think of this as is kind of shaping light, highlighting edges by adding contrast to them, so lightening one side, darkening another. Let's start with the left side of the building. So we'll load that selection. And I think I would like a black gradient coming in from the left, so it's sort of darkening the left edge and fades out to a slightly lighter, well, it fades out to transparent, so leaving the initial brightness on the right side. So move the gradient slider down to black. We'll set the angle and hit linear. And that's probably a bit too dark, so we can just reduce the opacity of that there like so. And if you want to change the angle or change anything about the gradient, you can double click it here and make your adjustments like so. Or you can open the gradient tool and maybe just adjust it again here like that. So let's do the opposite on the right side. So let's load that front selection again. We'll go for a white gradient this time, and we'll come in from the top left, top right, down to the bottom left. And actually I've done the wrong selection, so we'll do the left selection there, linear gradient, and let's just undo that again, just change the angle slightly, get it slightly more horizontal like that. Okay, and then maybe just reduce the opacity a bit. And so if we just toggle those both off and on, we can see the combined effect. And let's do the same thing or something similar for the middle panel or the front panel. So loading the front panel or the front plane of the building, let's have a dark gradient coming up this way. Reduce that opacity. And then maybe brightening from the top down that way. Slide the gradient slider up to white. We'll load it in the front panel. We'll hit linear there again. And let's reduce the opacity just to blend that in a bit. Probably doesn't need to be very strong at all. and I think we're getting somewhere. My only concern at this point is that the top section here is a little bit sort of washed out. I think because it starts off really bright anyway, maybe we need to actually just tone that down a little bit before we do anything else to it. Well, let's load that top selection and see if we can just reduce the white point. I'm not sure what the white point is there, so let's bring it down somewhere sort of around 2/3. Okay, let's bring in a bit of detail back. Maybe we can just adjust this now and give it a pop of contrast. Is that going to work? Not really. Maybe we do need to just darken it like so. But we do have a bit of detail in there now. So again, let's load another top selection and let's add a gradient, a light gradient coming in from the top downwards like so. I will just load the gradient tool there just so that I can just slightly adjust this a little bit so that it's coming in from top left to bottom right, and okay, that's all right. Now at this point it's looking pretty good, so I think maybe just a little touch of contrast to the whole building might be worth testing. So let's do that. Let's load the building selection. We can now add a curves adjustment and just give it a touch of contrast. And you know what, now that I've added that touch of contrast, I'm just having second thoughts. Maybe we want to go the opposite way with this gradient that's on the top section here. So let's get rid of that previous gradient. Let's load the top selection, and I think I'll go with a darker gradient from the top left this time, or maybe just from the left rather than top left. So let's do that. How does that? Yeah, okay, that's adding. Yeah, that's a lot more dynamic, I think. And okay, let's do the same thing again, lightening the right side. So load the top selection, gradient this way, and a light gradient, linear. Doesn't need to be that strong, so we'll just bring it down a bit. And there we go. Now that we've got the basic shading done for the image or for the building, let's just revisit some of the sort of the lightness and or darkness of specifically the background. Okay, does that look better? Slightly darker, probably. Although I'm wondering if we leave it around here, what if we were to lift the shadows here just in, yeah, because like this just looks a little bit too dark to me. So let's load the left selection and let's just lift the black point a little bit and see what that looks like. Yeah, that's okay, I think. Okay, I think I'm just going to show you something I wasn't planning on showing in this video. I was saving it for a later one, but my main issue that I want to resolve before we'll call this image done is the fact that the shadows in this little section here where I'm just wiggling the mouse are a little bit too dark. So what I'm going to do now is load a luminosity selection of the darkest shadows, so -5. We can see that is loading a selection of all the shadow pixels in the whole image, but I only want to affect the ones in this front face of the building. So now I've loaded this luminosity selection, I can intersect this with the front selection here, so that it's only going to show us the shadows in the front section. So intersect is the X button here. Now we have a selection that's just the shadows in that area, so let's save that. Let's call it front shadows. Now we have that, we can just lift the shadows using the black point treatment here, so we can just lift that a little bit, hit set black point, and there we go. That's just lifting those shadows a little bit like so. Maybe we'll just go a little bit further. But there we go. Like I said at the start, if you're watching this on YouTube, then there'll be a link in the description where you can go and download the panel. Or if you're watching this on the website, then yeah, you should be able to just find the relevant details if you want to go and grab a copy of the panel for yourself and install it and use it. And there's also a tutorials page on the website as well, pulsarplugins.com.